No, some of the some of the skills and knowledge you came up with, I got growing up and working with animals. As I grew up, some from summer jobs, not with animals, but working with instruments. My summer job I worked my way through college with was detecting natural gas leaks in pipes all over the western U.S. And so a lot of the organizational skills, the data logging skills, instrumentation skills I would use, some of it came from the summer job. But yeah, a lot of it came from university coursework in animal science, which included, of course, organic chemistry and biochemistry, nutrition labs, internships, not just at the field station, but in other laboratories. And then graduate school. I went to graduate school here, and I gained a lot of skills there, not just in the science part, but also the experimental animal I worked with in graduate school was a dairy goat, and there was no dairy goat farm here, so we started a small dairy goat farm and managed it and did all the milking and feeding and all that. So I gained a lot of skills either directly from courses, some directly from doing experiments, but a lot of it just doing the support stuff and background things that you need to do. And I lived and worked in Kenya for a long time, and I picked up a lot more of those ancillary skills that you do. You need if you want to do an animal nutrition experiment in a remote area or in an area that has limited resources, such as we had in Kenya. First, you had to grow the crops. In order to grow the crops, you needed to make sure that you had diesel fuel for the pump to pump the water up to irrigate the crops, and you knew how to harvest the crops and work with the people to help you in the fields. And so a lot of those skills you pick up along the way. They don't teach a lot of that. When people go to get a PhD in animal nutrition, there's nothing in there about standing in line to get a tank of diesel so that you can do your experiment, but you learn. This was in the early 80s, working with the Small Ruminant Collaborative Research Support Program. We were working with dual-purpose goats. Western Kenya, the farms have become so small that they can't sustain a whole cow, some of them. They're that small, but they can keep a couple of very productive goats alive and making milk and meat and that sort of thing. So we were doing intensive surveys on about 120 different farms, seeing how each little farm worked, where this might work in, and then we bred some dairy goats that some old Kenyan colonials on the coast had raised to local goats and produced a dual-purpose goat that we then tested on farms and worked with the farmers on how to feed them and care for them and get the milk and meat and manure from it. And as it turned out, the Kenyan scientists we educated while doing the early part of the experiments discovered after we left that it was actually the manure from the goats put more protein on the plates of families than either the milk or the meat, because these are very acid, very highly developed soils, and that manure provided organic matter, pH correction, nitrogen, and everything else. And it turned out to be, the milk and the meat was appreciated, but the real hit in terms of increasing the nutrient supply of the villages was via the manure. The animals went out and they grazed and they browsed, and they brought feed to them that wasn't needed elsewhere, and they delivered the nutrients to their human food crops. So sometimes you come up with something you did not expect, and that was a good find. I worked in Ethiopia. I worked with the International Livestock Research Institute for about 2.5 years. I was half-time here and half-time there. And I had, the first few years at Cornell, I came back here in '94, I actually did cooperative youth extension work. And then I traded that in for a half-time appointment with ILRI in Addis Ababa, although I live more in Debrecen at a research station near there. And there I focused more on nutritional toxicology. There's a lot of really nutritious, promising forage legume bushes and trees that produce leaves that are very high in calcium, very high in protein, very high in vitamin A, and all those good things. And they grow in drought, they grow in wet, they're very versatile. But occasionally, when you take the leaves from those plants and feed them to animals, they drop dead, which, even though the stuff on paper and in the lab looks very nutritious, they carry other things that cause a problem. I mean, all the plants in the world, if they didn't have some plan on how to defend themselves from animals that might eat them, they'd be extinct. I mean, they can't run, they're rooted to the ground, they're exposing tender parts to the air and the atmosphere, and so virtually all plants have something to keep animals from eating them. And so we worked with that, and we discovered kind of how that system worked and came up with a way of protecting the sheep and the cattle from the toxin that was in there, so that this resource could be fully utilized. And that's the work I did there. I guess the things we haven't stamped out yet. There are still people that think spending huge parts of your national treasure on things that blow up and pierce people is a good idea, despite abundant evidence to the contrary. So we still do have conflict, and I worry about that. There's been whether it's a short-term trend like bell-bottom pants or whether it's a long-term trend, there's been a trend recently in the U.S. with just more civility, less tolerance of people of other opinions. I think a lot of people have seen this. People tend to not just disagree with another person's idea, but to think they're a bad person for having an idea different from theirs. And that's not good. But hopefully it will go the way of the bell-bottom pants and Nehru jacket and the platform shoes, and we'll be back to a more civil society, because a lot of people have not signed up for that. They're not acting like that, and if they can get their neighbors to come along with that, that would be good. But yeah, I guess the kind of the divisions and and some of the hardening of opinions that get transferred to the person, not just the idea, that's a problem in different parts of the world, and some of that has led to the persistent violence. So there's less violence, but there's a potential for more unless we get that business about respecting people, even if they seem to have really dumb ideas. If we get that straightened out, I think we can reduce the violence further.